Hello, welcome again, and a great morning. And we have in the last class finished what we call till up to commencement date. Correct? So we have already started India 116, and slowly and steadily now we are trying to actually come into the groove of the what we call realities of this particular standard. So now, after having a look over the inception date and of course the commencement date too, now we are moving over to another important significant term regarding which we did talk about what we call in the first session too, wherein I did almost pleadings with you to not to ignore the first session, because I have seen that some of the student has a tendency to skip the things, thinking that they are already in the know of those, but then later on otherwise problem could creep in. So only ardent request is that don't what we call miss out on the first session, then move over to the second, completely comprehensively go through each and every wordings, correct? Because initial part of this particular standard, which happens to be pretty strong standard, is very what we call tough, so we need to understand everything. Now we move over to the next point. As I told you, we also talked about this particular point earlier. Once again I am coming back to it, that is lease term. If you remember, in the first session I gave you the example wherein I told you economic life of the asset is 15 years and the asset has been allowed to be used by the user for a period of 10 years. So lease term is 10 years. That was the situation in that particular what we call example. But lease term at this particular level now has got a little bit of different connotation, so we have to be very careful about that. Lease term. What exactly is the lease term, and why lease term is very crucial step before the calculation of the what we call lease liability, correct? So lease term, let me first of all write here determination of lease term, determination of lease term, determination of lease term is a very crucial step. Why? Is a crucial step so that we can calculate the lease liability. Determination of lease term is very crucial step before the calculation of lease liability, calculation of lease liability and corresponding what is the name of the corresponding asset? Right of use asset. Now what is lease term? The example which I took to begin this particular session in the very first session was quite simplified. But lease terms, as sometime it becomes very difficult to actually assess the lease term, to be very honest with you. So lease term, you need to be very well aware of it. Lease term is summation of what? It is summation of, pay attention, non-cancelable period I will let you know what is non-cancelable period, don't worry about that, plus periods covered by an option to terminate the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain, I'm using the red pen now, certain not to exercise the option. He is reasonably certain that he is not going to exercise the option. I will explain all these things, don't worry, just give me a minute or so. Then plus periods covered by an option to, I'm using a word, extend. To extend the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Now try to understand this. Suppose an agreement takes place between the lessor and the lessee. Correct? This is beginning of the first year. This is beginning of first year. Correct? On this date, let us say lease commenced. Correct? Now, initially at the inception date, on this particular date, let us say there is a specific agreement between the lessor and the lessee that lessee shall use this particular asset at least for 5 years. Generally, this period is known as non-cancelable period. The non-cancelable period is a period in which neither of the party can terminate the what we call original contract. Correct? That means this particular period cannot be cancelled at any cost. Both the parties do not have any right to what we call backtrack. Is it clear to you? That is non-cancelable period. I have taken this particular asset, say, for 5 years. This is your non-cancelable period. Non-cancelable period. Second point, when I entered the agreement, correct, let us say I took a building off you, correct, on lease initially for 5 years. Let us say this is the 5th year end. So initially I took the building off you. However, I am optimistic inside of my heart that my business would grow in future and perhaps I may need, let us say I have taken 2-3 floors of a particular building, correct, on lease of course. And inside of my heart, I'm quite sure that my business in future would grow. So here on this date itself, I enters into an agreement that initially I am taking this particular building for 5 years. But I have the right, I means the lessee. Lessee shall have the right to extend the period, say for 8 years. That means I can take this building for 6th year, 7th year and also for 8th year. Remember one thing, this particular agreement is also entered on the inception date itself. Correct? At the commencement of lease itself, there is an agreement, apart from the fact that I am going to take this particular building for 5 years, no doubt about that. But at the same time, if I would need this building for 3 more years, then you will have to give it to me. This is known as extendable period. This is known as, which I have written here at the 3rd number. This is 1, 2, 3. This is known as period covered by an option to extend. This particular period will be known as extendable period, but we are going to include this extendable period under the lease term only if we are sure that lessee is going to exercise the option. But it will have to be what we call just on this date itself. On the inception date, it need to be clarified whether lessee is going to actually exercise the option or not. Are you getting my point or not? That is known as extendable period. We will include this period in the lease term only if it is going to be exercised by the lessee. Extendable period. I'm writing in bracket like this. It means lessee is going to exercise this. Then we will also make it as a part of lease term. So lease term doesn't mean that only what we call the non-cancelable period. It can also include extendable period. Besides, in point number 2, I have written something. Sometime lessee says to lessee says to lessor, I will take for another 3 years, let us say from 8th to 11th year. I will take this particular asset for another 3 years. But during those 3 years, I will have a right to terminate. That means I can terminate immediately after 9th year. I can terminate immediately after 10th year. I can terminate, of course, then if I will terminate after 11th year, then the period will be over. But point here is that lessee is keeping a right to terminate it at any point of time. Generally, this period is not included. Remember one thing, generally this period is not included, but it will not be included only if lessee is sure that he is going to exercise the termination right. Not included. This period, first of all, this period is known as terminable period. Okay. Terminable period. Is it flashing on your screen? Yes. I have to take care of 3 things. 1, in front of camera. 2nd, laptop. To see when I look a little bit downwards, it means I'm watching into my laptop just to see actually whether the things which I'm writing down here are flashing on your screens or not. Sometimes I have to look upwards where the camera is fitted just to make sure that I'm also appearing as if I am looking at you. Correct? So terminable period. Terminable period shall be included. Okay, I will write it here itself. Included only. It will be included under the lease term only. I'm writing once again in bracket this way because I have already written it under what we call point number 2. If lessee is sure that he is not going to exercise, when I'm writing this, it means I'm signifying this particular sentence. Although he has a right to terminate, but he is not going to exercise that right, then it will be included. However, it will be excluded if termination right would be exercised. If termination right, just wait, it is not flashing on your screen. Now it is. If termination right would be exercised. So first of all, we need to be very, very well versed with lease term. So lease term could be total of all these three things. Are you getting my point or not? I've already told you, if terminable period, lessee has got the right to terminate, but if he is going to exercise the what we call right to terminate, then we will exclude this particular period, entire period. However, if he is not going to exercise this right, then definitely this particular period too will be a part of lease term. So generally when we say lease term is combination of all these three things. Of course, it needs a little bit more what we call explanation. So for the same, I will have to frame out a case study. I'll keep the sheet over here and you write along with me now a case study. Case study. In this case study, you write along with me. What should you write? This is case study 1, I think, isn't it? Entity new, entity News 9 enters into a lease for equipment that includes a non-cancelable term, a non-cancelable term of 6 years. Of course, because this is non-cancelable part, it will surely be included as a part of lease term for 6 years and 2-year fixed price, 2-year fixed period renewal option with what should I write? With lease payments that are intended to approximate the market rate at lease inception. Lease inception. There are no termination penalties. I will explain the question, don't worry about that. There are no termination penalties or other factors to be considered. Correct? So write along with me further. Other factors, you write indicating. Other factors indicating that entity News 9 is reasonably certain to exercise the renewal option. Of course, my question is, what is the lease term? So in this case, what is the lease term? Entity News 9 has taken an equipment and it contains a non-lease period of 6 years, no problem. But along with that, a 2-year fixed period renewal option. That means initially we have also agreed that if we may need, we will take it for further 2 years. And of course in those periods we will pay you the lease payment as per the market rates. That is the meaning of the sentence which I have written here. Correct? Now question later on says that actually in this case it is given that initially we took the what we call lease period for 6 years and renewal period is 2 years, but it will not be considered here. Why it will not be considered? Because in the last paragraph it has been made clear there are no termination penalties, but at the same time other factors indicate that Entity News 9 is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Sorry, here it is mentioned that it is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Sorry. There are no termination penalties or other factors indicating that. So it means this particular sentence shows that this particular entity is reasonably certain to not to exercise the option. If we will go through this particular sentence, it means there are no termination penalties, and it also means there are no other factors indicating that. Intentionally the language of the question is twisted. Correct? So there are no termination penalties, and it also means no other factors indicating that News 9 is reasonably certain to exercise the what we call renewal option. So that is why we are not going to consider this particular period. Is it clear to you or not? So we will consider in this case the lease term to be as 6 years. That will be my answer. At the lease commencement date, at the lease commencement date, comma, the lease term shall be considered at 6 years. Shall be considered at 6 years. Renewal period will not be considered. Renewal period shall not be considered as lessee is certain not to exercise the same. Not to exercise the same. This second paragraph is important to understand. There are no termination penalties or other factor. That doesn't mean, it means there are no termination penalties and no other factors indicating that what we call News 9 is reasonably certain to exercise. No other factors are there that it will exercise. So it means it is The News 9 is not going to exercise the option, so we are not going to consider that particular part. Correct? We take another case study to stress the discussion. Case study 2. In this case study, I write entity. There is an entity by the name of, let us say, Fox 5. Entity Fox 5 enters into a lease for building that includes a non-cancelable term. Okay, I will write once again non-cancel. It's a pretty long word. Non-cancelable period or term. Henceforth, if I would need to write non-cancelable period, I am going to use this acronym NCP. Take care of this, correct? Because it's such a long standard, I want to put everything by way of what we call black and white. So that's the reason actually lots of writing need to be done also on my part, and that is why I need a little bit of short forms, correct? Non-cancelable period, NCP. And all the pens which I am accustomed to write up with, I have left in my office itself, so that's the reason also. Non-cancelable period, I was talking about, of 8 years, let us say, of 8 years, and a 2-year, comma, market period, 2-year market period renewal. This is a term so often we will use. It means if in future we will extend the period, we will pay you at prevailing market rate, correct? That is the point. Before comma, entity means Fox 5. Before entity takes possession of the building, before entity takes possession of the building, comma, entity pays for leasehold improvements I will take the next sheet, correct? Something is written here. Okay, I will cut it. Improvements, this was the point I was writing. Then also write the leasehold improvement. The leasehold improvement are expected to have significant significant value at the end of 8 years and that value can only be realized through continued occupancy of the leased property. Of course, question revolves around this particular concept. What is the lease term? What is the lease term? What is the lease term? So what is the lease term in this particular case? Initially, entity folks enter into a lease for a building that includes a non-cancelable period of 8 years. Fine. That period, of course, will be part of lease term. But before the entity takes the possession, what it does, it spends considerable amount in leasehold improvements. That means whatever property it is taking on lease, it is spending something to improve. Now question states that the benefit of this improvement could accrue to the lessee only if lessee would continue to occupy the property. So quite obviously, no one would like to let the benefits go unnecessarily. So in this case, it is quite obvious that entity folks would like to continue to avail of the benefits due to the leasehold improvements. So lease period will be considered as 10 years. Correct? So my response will be like this. Lease period or lease term, comma, at the inception date comma, shall be considered as of 10 years, 8 plus 2, 8 non-cancelable period plus renewable period, correct? That is 10 years. Non-cancelable period plus renewable period, 10 years. Since, comma, entity Fox, what was the name? Entity Fox 5 has undertaken considerable leasehold improvements and which would be of significant value and such value could be, such value could be availed, could be availed of only through continued occupancy, through continued occupancy, comma, it is certain that lessee would exercise renewal period, that lessee, that is entity Fox 5, shall exercise renewal period. Is it clear to you? Then we take another case study. This is case study. Just let me message because I received a call from, just as a protocol, let me give the message that I am recording the session. Correct? Just allow me a minute or so. Can't help it. So it's okay. So now I will take the case study. This is case study 3. Case study 3. Correct? Entity CNN4 enters into a lease for an unidentified retail space in a shopping center or in a mall, whatever you may like to write. The retail space will be available to the entity only for the months of October, November and December. So this particular retail space shall be available to us only for 3 months, correct? During a non-cancelable, see here I am using the short form, non-cancelable period or term of 7 years. The lessor agrees to provide the same retail space for each of these 7 years. Of course, what's the lease term? This is the question. Correct. Lots of writing need to be done. Now my question here is, have you able to understand it? Just pay attention. One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. An agreement has taken place between the lessor and the lessee, wherein, of course, non-cancellable period, as you can see, is for 7 years. But during these 7 years, every year, this is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, and year 7. Each year, I am going to get this space only for 3 months. Don't forget this. You are getting a space only for 3 months. Are you getting my point or not? So 3 into 7, that will be equal to 21. So in this case, your lease period will be considered as of 21 months. That is what my point is. Of course, lease period, technically speaking, is 7 years, but effectively it is equal to 21 months. We will continue with now some more issues, but that I will take up in the next session.